And hello, everybody out there. This is Michael Harding for On the Arts. Now, I want to start out with just a little bit of a story. When I came here to St. George, I thought about perhaps doing a show with people here in southern Utah who were into the arts. I am thrilled to have two guests here that remind me of something that happened to me a while ago. I went overseas and I studied acting as well as staging Shakespeare in England, actually. And I had a great time being on the stage at Shakespeare's Globe, if you will. Now, I never got to perform as part of their season, but I did get to stand on that stage and speak the words of this wonderful, wonderful playwright. And I thought that was something special I could bring to southern Utah. No other American had this experience. And then I looked into the resumes of my guests and was thrilled to see that there was some overseas experience there as well. Now, I'd like to start by introducing one of my guests, Gary Morris. How are you today?
I'm dandy. How are you today?
I'm doing extremely well. Now, I have the pleasure of working with both of my guests, Gary Morris, as well as Kent Harrison Hayes, in a in a current production of Art by Yasmina Reza. And it is translated by Christopher Hampton, and this is at the Center for the Performing Arts at KDXI. Now, I've gotten to know these two actors, and something that always concerns me about doing a radio show is making sure that there is content through the entire thing. After having gotten to know these two, I'm not worried whatsoever.
Really?
So, Gary, looking over your resume, if you will, and your bio, it did strike me with yours particularly that you'd done some work in London. Tell us about that.
Well, I started in London at the Drama Studio. I'm a graduate of the London Drama Studio. And then after that, I did some shows at the Cockpit Theater. And then I wanted to stay there, and I could have, but I decided to come back to the U.S. and go out to L.A. Yeah.
Got it. And how many years have you been in L.A.?
Oh, gosh. Giving away my age here.
Hitting 30 next year.
Yeah, that's about how many years I was in L.A.
Got it. And I am going to bring up something that you questioned right before the show. Not questioned, but wanted to make sure that I was aware did happen quite a while ago. And that is actually your participation in the television show WKRP in Cincinnati.
Oh, my goodness. You're really dating me now.
What did you do on that show?
Well, actually, that was my first job in television. I played a waiter, and that's how I got my AFTRA card, which is now SAG-AFTRA. Yeah, so... And I absolutely loved it. It was so much fun being on a set. Enjoyed it totally.
I have to tell you, I've always been a Howard Hessman fan.
Oh, yeah, he's a great guy. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, of course, I only knew him as his character in WKRP in Cincinnati and saw him on the occasional made-for-TV movie, and I thought, I know that guy. I know his work.
May I interject?
Absolutely.
Several years ago, Gary and I went to see a live production of Quills in Los Angeles at the Geffen Theater, and Howard Hessman was playing the lead character. And I love Howard Hessman, and when he was on WKRP in Cincinnati and a lot of other things. But when we went to see this production of him as the lead character at the opening of the second act, here comes Howard Hessman many years later from WKRP. Stark naked in the jail where he's writing in the jail
for about 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Now that takes some courage.
Little awkward.
Front row of the theater, so that was an experience. So we really know Howard Hessman.
Gotcha. You know him better than I think most people can say they do. Now, isn't that how to make great theater? You put somebody naked up on stage. Daniel Radcliffe, he had no fame whatsoever until he was in Equus and naked on stage.
True. That is so true. And then he was just horsing around. So.
Okay, we will stop right there. All right. So, let's see. You've worked in London, Gary, and let's hear a little bit about the career of Kent. Where do you come from? Why are you here?
I'm originally from northern Utah, and I left I'm not afraid to say, I left back in 1978 to move down to Los Angeles and pursue all different sorts of things in the arts, both behind the scenes and in front of the camera and behind the microphone like we're doing now. So that was a long time ago. It's been fun, and I've been performing since I was a kid. So it's been fun. I mean, it's just in my blood, and love doing it.
Oh, fantastic. And so you both went to L.A., and you mentioned that you were doing, Kent, some things other than the performing. Is that true for both of you? You explored other avenues?
Yeah, we both ran for years. We ran a video and audio post-production facility down in Los Angeles.
And one in Mexico.
And one in
Mexico as well.
And so that was eye-opening. And we both actually not only just running the production studio, we also did voiceovers. So we did characters in a lot of the productions that we were doing too. And at the very beginning when we started doing that gig, when we were the president and vice president of the studio, we were dubbing a lot of Japanese productions into English. And so that was a lot of fun. I mean, we were doing Tom's Japanese version of Tom Sawyer into English, which I played a few characters in, and Dog Tanyan and the Three Muskehounds, we did a whole bunch.
Three Muskehounds.
So there was a lot of really fantastically high end stuff that we were doing then.
Yeah, high end. Yeah. It was an interesting time in our life, though, because we had a contract with Paramount Pictures, and we did probably about 85% of all their product into Spanish as well. And one of the things that we did, and I know you're a Star Trek fan,
absolutely,
is we dubbed all of those into Spanish, except for the very first one with William Shatner.
Really? And that one they just deemed not worthy to be dubbed into Spanish?
It had already been dubbed into Spanish by someone else. So
okay.
we did all of the other series up through, I think, Enterprise. I can't remember if we worked on Enterprise by the time we left Los Angeles, but we did everything and all
the movies too. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So we created that lingo and all of those words in Spanish.
And in fact, we actually also translated all of the Klingon and all of the everything else into Spanish versions of Klingon and everything. So
it was really interesting.
I would say so.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I'm curious as to how you translated the whales in Star Trek 4. I don't know how that comes across
it was
in Spanish.
Just like that.
That was actually the French version you just did.
Okay, gotcha.
So that was awkward.
In the animal kingdom, I speak many languages, but I don't know what they are.
Well, it was excellent. Your accent was perfect.
Gotcha. And I'll tell you, one time I was in Salt Lake City. I was actually doing some work at Pioneer Theater Company, which I know both of you have done work at as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so excited. I walked into an audio studio downtown, and that's back when Touched by an Angel was filming there.
Sure.
And in comes Della Reese, and she has this. Did you guys ever meet her?
No,
never.
Oh my goodness, a presence. She doesn't walk into a room; she defines the room around her. And I was just so excited, so starstruck, because I knew she had come to record some of the narration for the show. Now I understand. Occasionally, you would have somebody we may have heard of in your recording studio.
Mm-hmm.
We, in fact, had several people in the studio. In the last several years of when we had the studio, we were doing a lot of DVD commentary work. So we had people coming into the studios. We had Brad Pitt and...
I think I've heard of him.
Yeah, he's a minor character.
Yeah.
One of our favorites, though, I'm going to skip ahead. The very last people that we had in the studio before we closed were... we were doing the DVD commentary work for the original Bob Newhart show. So we had, in our client lounge, we had Suzanne Plachette and Tom Poston and I can't remember one other person that was there, but they were unbelievably delightful, wonderful people, and what a blast to have. I can't tell you what Suzanne Plachette said when we told her we were closing the studio.
No, not on the air.
Not on the air, but she was hysterical and wonderful. And they were the fact that they were married, that they actually got married at the end of their lives was just amazing. They were just delightful people.
Fantastic. And I know a lot of our younger listeners are just saying, Tom, post office man. I don't know who this is.
This is classic television. Go watch it.
But I think they would know The Simpsons.
Absolutely.
And Arrested Development.
Absolutely. Yes.
When they were nominated for their Emmy, they were in our studio right when they've heard it. And it was incredible. They just were screaming. It was...
Well, I don't know if you guys ran into this. The few movie stars or television stars that I've run into, just walking down the street and such, they look like little teeny heroin addicts. That's where I know people were praising Brad Pitt for the working out he did for the movie Troy. And when I actually saw him, I wanted to give him a few bucks just to say, please go, eat some corn syrup or something.
He was way taller than I expected, though.
Really?
Whereas Kiefer Sutherland, when he came in, they were, I can't remember what the name of the movie was, but they were both coming in to do the DVD commentary work for the same film. And when Kiefer Sutherland was there, I happened to be in the lobby of the studio, and I looked down and said, without looking at him, "Can I help you, young man?" And it was just this tiny little fellow, and I was like, "Oh, hi, I'm sorry." I mean, he was so tiny.
Oh, 24 inches is what we're saying.
Exactly. He was so
But I have to say, they were all great. And they, the ones that had really sort of what we call in the business made it, you understood why. Not only because of their talent, but because they just treated everybody so wonderfully. They were just good-hearted people, It wasn't there was no air at all.
Well, that's where you said something the other night, Gary, that I hope you don't mind me sharing our personal conversations. But this was after a rehearsal of Art, and this is the plug, opening Thursday night at the Center of the Performing Arts at Kayenta. But you talked about how wonderful it was to meet myself, which is not an uncommon experience, by the way, but to meet my wife and myself, and we feel the same way about meeting you two and others, that we kind of find our peeps.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's as hip as you're ever going to hear me talk. But we find our peeps. We find those people that we're comfortable with. And you mentioned that the most successful people seem to be the very friendly people, the ones who get along with others. I would have to agree in my experience with that, whether it be in the live theater, my limited experience on film. I was beaten up by a football player in a movie with Treat Williams one time.
Oh.
And boy, that's no, on film. I'm sure they wanted to really beat me up, but Treat Williams was one of those examples. I was familiar with his work as Stanley Kowalski, this very imposing figure. And then I saw him, and he came up to me and said, "Hi, I'm Treat Williams." And I thought, no, you're not. Seriously. He's probably listening. He's one of our 4 listeners right now. And,
Wait,
and
you told us that we had 5.
Well, one went to the bathroom.
Oh, okay.
All right, moving on. But we talked about some. Kent, you were talking to me either last night or the night before about Bryan Cranston.
Oh, yeah.
And what was your experience with him?
Brian was an amazing guy. I mean, we knew him 34,
30 years ago.
And he was in the studio when we were doing all of those different series into English from different languages, mostly from Japanese. But he and his brother Kyle were both in the studio recording, and we got to know him then. Really amazingly great guy then. Very, very personable, really sweet. And one of the things that I was telling you the other night was that years later, Gary and I were at an opening of a show, another one at the Geffen Playhouse, and I hadn't seen Bryan forever, and so I went over to him, and 10 feet away, he said, "Kent, how are you doing? It's so great to see you." Really, really nice guy, and everybody that we've spoken to just says that he's just unbelievably gracious and a lovely guy to work with, so that's nice.
Yeah, and I think that's what we found. Most of these people are gracious, and they're professional. Every once in a while you get one or two who their egos don't quite get in the door.
Yes, but enough about
But
me.
we won't talk. We won't talk about them.
Well, and actually, I do want to shift the conversation a little bit to you, our guests, and our experiences. But in order to do that, of course, I'm going to talk about myself a little bit.
Wait a minute.
One of the things, and okay, you're looking like you're interested. These are good actors, ladies and gentlemen. But we talked about how you've met some of these big name people. I've met some big name people, and it's not really all that impressive when you think about how small the world is of performing, of theater, of film. And one of the common conversations that artists have is, well, I've met this person, or I've met this person, or when this person called me, oh, excuse me, this is Stephen on the phone. Sondheim.
I've got a bigger name on the other line.
I'll get back to you. Oh, I think somebody's calling in. This might be Stephen. No, I'm kidding. I don't know how to answer the phone at this point, I'll tell you. But it really is all you know, who you know, and also your recognizability. And I'm going to qualify this by telling you one of my favorite stories of myself as a young actor. I was a journeyman at the Warehouse Theater in South Carolina, and I worked at a temp agency for my day job. And oh, the agent at the temp agency, I was just in love with her from the moment I saw her. And I was so excited to ask her out on a date. And she was the sophisticated South Carolinian. And I was so excited to get to know this girl that I fell in love with in the city I wasn't from. And I was nervous because I was just this young, gangly actor. I had my hair then, which is really a wonderful thing. I think of those days fondly.
I've never seen you without a hat, so I don't know that you don't have hair.
There is a reason for this, ladies and gentlemen. But
you notice I'm staying out of this conversation. Yeah.
Yes, Gary has a rather wide part on his head right now. But anyways, I took her to dinner, and I thought, how am I going to impress this girl? How am I going to impress this girl? And it was perfect timing. Absolutely perfect timing. This little old lady came up to our table and just said, "Oh, you work at the Warehouse Theater." And I said, "Well, yes, I do." She's like, "I saw you the other night and you were brilliant." And I turned to my date and I said, "Yes, you're welcome." That was the only date we actually went on, but it sure did feel good being recognized. Let me ask you two, with your actual resumes, and we can talk about you now, I did want to point out something that is on yours, Gary. You were in a play, The Duchess of York.
Yes.
And you mentioned that this was reversed sex casting. What is this?
Yeah. The director had an idea, and it actually kind of worked. So all the males were switched to play the female roles, and just the other, and vice versa. And it was when I was actually going to school at the drama studio. So it was a bit more experimental, but it worked.
Shocking.
Yeah, it was shocking. Yeah.
Well, the reason I bring this up is last week we had Melinda Funstein Vaughn on the show.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
And yes, we talked a little bit about her work at SUU, and she had directed a production of Urinetown, which I did get to see and was a lot of fun. But she's also the founder, or one of the co-founders, of the Statera organization, which is dedicated to women's roles in theater, and not just on the stage, but women working in the theater. And we had a conversation about how it's becoming very standard and very common and very trendy to particularly take traditionally male roles and cast them with a female. In Shakespeare, holy cow, every show you can think of has been cast that way and is more and more. And in fact, this summer, I don't know if you've had a chance to check out the casting for Utah Shakespeare Festival, but they're doing quite a bit of that. Shylock is played by an actress this year.
Wow.
Bassanio is being played by an actress this year. And I'm not sure what their bent is on it, if they're going to have the women play a male or if they're going to explore having a woman as the role. But that just struck me as you mentioned, Gary, that at the time it was experimental. I'd say we're moving into a pretty standard practice.
Yeah, that's true.
I think so. Yes. And it can really work. It just depends on the play. Yeah. And for that particular production, it worked.
Also,
Yeah.
but you did I don't mean to be speaking out of turn, but Gary did a production of King Lear where the fool was played by a woman, and she was wonderful.
Yeah.
So, and that was, 11 years ago?
I don't know. All the years go by.
That was just a blink of an eye in my career, let me tell you. But I think that's really rather exciting. Now, both of you have worked at Pioneer Theater Company
Yes.
up north, and I'm assuming both at SLAC, the Salt Lake Acting Company?
I have not worked at SLAC. He has. I've worked at a couple of the other theaters up in Salt Lake.
Gotcha. Did you have something to say there, Kent? I saw anticipation on your face.
No, it came and went.
Got it. No,
It happens to him often.
It does.
You just smile and nod, and that's it.
that works on the radio, let me tell you.
It does.
There was my first week of doing this show. I was so excited having a real connection with my guests, and I caught myself just smiling and nodding quite a bit. And then it occurred to me, that can't be heard.
Oh, yeah. You actually have to respond.
Absolutely. Shakukukutakatubudu. That made sense in my head. So. Now, both of you have significant film, television, as well as live on-stage experience. Do you have a preference?
Theater.
Yeah.
I like the experience of hearing the audience, the immediate reaction. With film and TV, you don't really know sometimes if it's a film, it could be a year and a half later, whether it even works or not. You know?
I mean, it's interesting because I actually prefer the stage too, because every night is a new experience, and it's for me, I mean for everybody, it's just an enormous amount of work, obviously, because you're working every single night. When you do a film, you finish the film and then you go on. There's a great quote from Barbra Streisand that I read 100 years ago that she just said, "I love doing film because I can be performing in 1,000 theaters across the world and be home taking a bubble bath at the same time." So I mean, that's true, but the immediacy of what happens with the audience, the connection that an actor has with the audience, and whether it's good or bad or ugly, it's being in that moment and working yourself through that moment and really living life. One of the things we always talk about as actors is being present and being in the moment when you're acting. And when you're acting on stage, you are in the moment and you're living with the audience, and the audience is living with you, and however you interpret the show that night is going to affect how the audience is interpreting the show that night, and it's
how the other
such
actors,
a symbiotic relationship. Yeah, I mean, I think it's scary and it's thrilling all at the same time.
Well, I think some of my favorite performances that I've been in and also witnessed have been those where something went wrong. And
hush your mouth.
Yes.
Well, people think, oh, something going wrong on stage, that must be a terrifying feeling. And I don't think there's an actor among us who hasn't been terrified at one point on stage. Mm-hmm. But I've really learned to embrace that and to have a good time with the audience. For example, I was doing a production of The Taming of the Shrew. And this was in an outdoor theater, and a stray dog ran up on stage during the performance. And, of course, the audience was like, oh, is that planned? I don't know. And there was tittering in the audience. And there comes a point on stage where you just have to join them. You can't pretend the dog is not there. And that particular performance, we had been getting stale. We'd been performing for about a month and a half. And it was amazing as we discovered how many references to dogs there were in that script after that moment. And, of course, the audience just laughed every time it was spoken, and we laughed with them. And wasn't that just a wonderful experience with them?
I will tell you a little tiny bit of a frightening flip side to that story. Years ago, I was in a play called The Brick and the Rose, where I played a young drug addict. And at one point in time, the run of the show went great until closing night. And I went out and had this unbelievable fit right after about the first 10 minutes of the show. I was overdosing and talking, and I said this line, and I hyperventilated, and I passed out on stage. And when I came to, which was only 30 seconds later, the cast was gathered around me. I had no idea where I was. I sat up straight, screamed the last line of the play, and ran off stage. So I made that.
Did people want their money back?
Very, very short play that night.
Well, I'd say that seemed like a very dramatic event. And maybe I would have been very impressed had you woken up and just said, Rosebud, and run off stage. That as well as for our older listeners.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was going to say,
that was very scary, though.
Well, it's one of my favorite experiences as a teacher. And I do teach young actors. I warp them for life and get them excited about it, hopefully.
Bless you.
But my first year of teaching, I had a student in class, and a very common acting exercise that's designed to get them to compel each other without words is, of course, you have them stand on opposite sides of the room, and I line up the two lines, and they have their partner, and they have to compel their partner to come towards them with no words. Very, very basic exercise. Well, when you get into teaching, I don't know if you two have done any teaching, but when you get into it, they don't warn you about things like this. I said on the count of 3, compel your partner. 1, 2, 3. And this young lady shot straight up into the air and fell backwards. And, everybody was shocked. And her partner was like, oh my gosh, and started going towards her. And I'm like, that is A work, ladies and gentlemen. And then realized she had had a seizure right on cue.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
But I will tell you, I will never forget that dramatic experience in class. She's okay, by the way.
Did she use it later in life in another show?
I sure hope she did. And then my deal with my students is if they do win a Tony Award, I get 2 seconds. They just have to say Michael Harding. I don't care in what context. They can even tell the truth about me, but...
That'll take more than 2 seconds.
Well, tell me, have the two of you ever taught in any capacity?
Gary has.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm a teacher. I'm a coach, an acting coach. And in fact, I did a workshop here, I guess it was about a year ago. It was wonderful. It was incredible. It was just 6 weeks, once a week, and we had maybe 25 people. And I set it up so that you have working actors, and then you have people that just pay to come and sit and watch the working actors.
This is what you could be doing.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is what you could be doing.
Auditing the class.
Actually, what happened was 2 of the people after the first week switched over to being working actors. So, but I loved it because I saw people from the very beginning, and then how they actually got so much better in 6 weeks' time. It felt so incredible. Incredible for them to see that change.
Just FYI, I was not allowed to participate in this class.
No, he wasn't.
But I have to say that I did go to the first class to observe a couple of things, and then I came to the very last class to film. And it was pretty amazing. I mean, not everyone really had grown, exponentially, but everyone had grown. And there were some people there that made an amazing transformation. And that was fun. That was actually fun to come into it at the beginning and the end and see what the process had done for all 25 of these people.
In fact, one of the people that was in that, she is now in Other Desert Cities, which is another production that's happening after hours. And she's never acted before.
And who is that?
Her name is Pat Evans.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, and it's funny because she wrote me the other day. She does this great Edith Bunker impersonation.
Stifle, stifle,
exactly.
stifle.
So several years ago, we did a variety show out in KDXI, and she and I did Archie and Edith, and we did the opening theme song.
It was very funny.
All in the Family. It was very funny, and she was great. And then she went to Gary's class, and then she was cast in Other Desert Cities, and she's terrified. But she said, Do you mind if I actually put you down as one of my mentors? And I went, yeah.
It's always great to get that credit.
Of course, too.
Pardon me?
She's mentioning you, too.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Kent and Gary.
Gary.
Well, it's more Kent and Gary.
I'll tell you, I'm always nervous to be invited to somebody's workshop as an example. I don't know if you remember the I Love Lucy episode where she wanted to be a writer. And she was so excited to get the offer to have part of her book included in this publication. And it turned out to be in a chapter called Don't Let This Happen to You. And I always think, is that why they're bringing me in to this workshop?
Did you find out?
No, I was afraid to ask, actually.
But you enjoy teaching, don't you?
I do.
Yeah.
And I always tell my students that it's not enough to just check off boxes. I'm not interested in having a student just check off the boxes and pass the class. What really excites me as a teacher is when I'm working with them, and we'll be working on a play that I know very well, The Crucible, and I see you play John Proctor in The Crucible.
Yes.
One of my absolute favorite plays, or an Ibsen, or a Shakespeare, which most of my training is in. I get really excited when a student does something that makes me look at it differently.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say my acting has gotten 20 times better since I started teaching, just because I get to watch and I get to imitate the work that I'm seeing in the classroom. And I've always told my students that as artists, we're liars and thieves. I mean, we steal the good work of other people and then build on it ourselves, and then we lie about it by saying it was our own organic discovery. But I'm stealing from my students all the time. And I'm not ashamed to say that, those of you who are listening.
Wow, that was super, super brave.
But I think that's what we artists do, and that's what I like about teaching. And I've always been an advocate, or not an advocate, but always believed very strongly that as artists, it's our responsibility to teach in some way. That doesn't mean necessarily being a formal teacher in academia, but to pass on our craft in some way. That's just my thought on it.
No, I absolutely agree. One of the things, too, that there are so many talented people. Of course, I was born and raised, and I never say I grew up, but I was born and raised in Utah, and I was so fortunate from a really young age that in Davis County, Utah, they used to have the summer arts program where kids did one-act plays every summer, and sometimes there were 2 sets of plays depending on how many kids signed up. But there were so many kids that wanted to be on stage. There were a lot of kids that had never done anything like that, but their parents felt like it could benefit them in some way. And if I hadn't had that summer theater program when I was a kid, I honestly don't know what would have happened later in life. It gave me the spark of, this is my life. This is what I need and want to do. But it gave me such focus, and it also gave me a love for literature that I didn't think that I don't know that I would have had I not had that experience. And whenever we talk about how important the arts are to everything, to all academia, it is so important to have that to give you a better appreciation of everything across the board. And boy, am I a huge advocate for that. So people in your situation that are now teaching kids at this age, bless your heart, because it is just one of the most important things I think you could possibly do.
I believe that as well. We're absolutely on the same page. Now, that actually takes us into a wonderful segue to the performance, the show that's being, yes, we're doing the hand from Wayne's World, I think. The performance of art. Now, if I were to describe this play to someone, I would say it's about a white painting and 3 friends who discuss it. Now, certainly that doesn't even begin to delve into the depths or what the play is really about. But something that strikes me every single time that I hear this, I'm stage managing this show, so I get to hear these wonderful words every night and watch some very, very fine performances, by the way, so please do check this out. I hear words that are being spoken about hoity-toity art and these attitudes towards it, but I love the fact that it's relatable to anyone. You don't have to be an art connoisseur to get this play, to understand what this play is. And it's not only in this play art, but you might have a play about, 16th century Sweden. It's about people. And I love it when young people, particularly young people, I'm out of that category now. I get to observe young people now.
Just ask us, we'll let you.
But they can read a script and they understand it's about people. Mm. And something you were saying about how the arts are for us all.
I think also art is really about friendship and complexities and the loves and burdens of friendship. Yeah. What do you think?
And by the way, as we make that segue, one of my favorite jerk things to do in the theater is when I go up on lines. I know no actor ever forgets their lines when they're on stage.
No.
But one of my favorite things to do with someone that I'm very familiar with is to, when it's my line, just look at them and say, "What do you have to say about that?" And that look of fear on their face. I'm sorry, I totally interrupted here.
No, we interrupted you. What you were asking profound things about.
Quite often, I have no idea what's coming out of my mouth. I just count on the fact that it'll be profound.
Then I will build on what Gary said. One of the things that I think I love about the play art is that I think it has very little to do with art. I think it has to do with our perceptions of life more so than talking about art. Art is an excuse to...
it's a catalyst.
Yeah, I mean, but we are all talking, all three of these characters like different types of art, and they're very reflective of their inner souls, basically. And or at least they think they are. I mean, my particular character is a jerk, and
I can relate to him. Is this a problem?
That's why we like. Anyway,
I'm not going to say anything else.
And yet he likes classical art, which and I'm still seriously at this point in time, I'm still looking at that and going, it's a fascinating thing to me why this character Mark relates to classical art, whereas I think he should more easily relate to the white painting, because Mark is a very black and white kind of guy. And so it's kind of interesting. I almost think that Mark's love of classical painting is more of a pretense, and he's afraid to say that he actually likes it because it reflects his true inner soul, the white painting. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting. There are so many layers to this show that I find fascinating, and we discover them every single night that we do them. So it's fun.
Well, like I said, I get the privilege of hearing these words over and over, and I'm struck by the humanity in this script. There's one of my particular favorite moments, and I'm not going to get real specific. I know a lot of actors are superstitious about that. Don't share with me the moment you love.
Don't talk about the Scottish play. No.
Yeah, that one about William Wallace? I don't know. Which, by the way, side story, when I was over... This is why a radio program is good and bad for me. When I was over in England, I visited Scotland. I was doing some work with Stirling Castle, and I went to the William Wallace Memorial, and I couldn't figure out why all of the Scotsmen around me were so grumpy until I looked at the statue they'd erected, and it was Mel Gibson. I kid you not. And actually, it has been taken down since then because of the local outcry over this.
No kidding.
Okay, now back to what we were talking about. I will not mention the Scottish play. We're not in a theater, but I still won't mention it. I can't even remember what else. No, one of my favorite moments.
The humanity of the play.
Humanity. There's a moment where there's the word, I think it's deconstruction, is used, and of course in the sense of an artistic genre, if you will. And even though I've heard of some of these terms, these styles of art, I'm watching two people asking the other, is it okay for me to express this? I'm watching two people asking each other to accept what they believe and what they like. And I'll tell you, it gets me every single night. Sometimes I feel a little guilty because I'm not looking at the page, ready to deliver the line if you need it. But this play is full of those things. And that's to me not only one of the great things about this production, but also about the theater. You mentioned that you love live theater because of the actual interaction. That to me is what it's all about.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing, when you were just talking, I'm sorry, I'm stuttering because you just were talking, and one of the things that I wanted to say was the other thing about art, this play, is that remove art and insert religion or politics or anything like that, because it is the exact same conversation. These three gentlemen are discussing.
I agree.
It could be. It reminds me of My Big Fat Greek Wedding, when people talked about that film and they took out the word Greek and inserted Italian or whatever, and that film was so relatable on so many levels because, well, it just was. It was humanity, and that's what art is. It is every person's discussion about everything that it's difficult to discuss. Or
becomes difficult that you didn't know was.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, sorry, little interjection.
No, that's okay. You're actually here to talk, so that's great.
Okay then.
Now, I do want to shift just a little bit because we're not at time yet, but we are close. There's something that particularly intrigued me, Kent, about your biography here, and it says that you have scored shows.
I did.
And also that you've written some shows that were performed, I'm assuming musicals? And tell me about that, your musical work.
Well, I've mostly done musicals my whole life. I mean, I've done a lot of straight plays, but I like to sing, and I've mostly done musical theater. But the shows that we've done out here, I wrote and directed and was in a couple of basically musical reviews that we did out in Kayenta. But the 2 feature films that I scored, and that was a long time ago, but they were 2 feature films for Nickelodeon. Probably, and if Nickelodeon is listening, I apologize, but they were probably the 2 worst films that have ever been made. But
Hey, we're doing some FCC violation here.
They were cute.
They were cute.
Yeah,
they were
cute.
called the Adventures of Manx Mouse and Peter of Placid Forest, and it was fun. I mean, the original Japanese cartoons were done by this company called Toho Kushinsha, and they hired me to actually score the shows. So I wrote all new music and did all the lyrics for a bunch of different songs and music, intermittently throughout the thing. And I never told my parents that I had done that. And my mom heard these shows on Nickelodeon when she was babysitting.
Well, you
her
also have to preface it by saying that you were singing in it as well.
Yeah, I was singing. But Mom heard the show, one of them on Nickelodeon, and she called me. She's down in California, and she said, "Are you on a cartoon on Nickelodeon? I just heard your voice." And that is a mother's love, I'll tell you. The fact that she could...
Well, she was like in the kitchen, wasn't she? And she just said, "Isn't that Kent's voice? This is strange."
Yeah, so
That's better than the penguins up north being able to find their child after miles and miles.
Yes, Mother was pretty interesting, and I was hatched, so there you go.
Gotcha. And you were delivered with a rock, apparently. Well, I'll tell you, the reason I bring that up, and of course, I have my own radio show now, so I like to talk about myself. I was struck by that because I've toyed with scoring shows, with writing musicals and such, and I do not pretend at all to be an expert on composition. But it reminded me of my intro into the creation of theater back in high school. I'm a little ashamed to admit, not too much, but a little, that it was in AP English that we had to read a Shakespeare play and somehow present a staged version of it. Well, Hamlet's a long play, and I had been told by my teacher, "Look, you're probably not going to understand Shakespeare, but we have to teach it, so we'll do this subject." And something I do emphasize to my students now, it's written in English when it comes down to it. But with Hamlet, absolutely, yes, Kent, it really is. With Hamlet, I was too lazy to read the whole thing. So I got together with 2 of my friends, and Les Miserables had just come out, and Phantom of the Opera. Those were the big shows at the time. And we decided I was going to be Michael Lloyd Webber, and we were going to write Hamlet the Rock Opera. And we actually read 2 of the scenes. I'm proud to say we did get through them. But it was one of the worst pieces of musical theater ever presented. I mean, Sondheim actually died and came back to life when he even had an inkling this was happening. And I want to let you know, I still have this recording. And
I can't wait to hear it.
I'm actually thinking of bringing it on the show, on our next show, just so I can play it against the music of a real composer. And had I read your bio earlier, I would have had you bring some things in so that we could listen. And actually, that is a fantastic segue. I'm all about segues, ladies and gentlemen. Into the introduction to our show on Thursday, we're going to have a guest named Robbie Matheson. And he is one of the co-founders of the Grand Circle New Music Festival, where they only do original works. And he also does some fantastic electronic music. He's all about finding music in sounds that we don't normally find all that appealing necessarily, or that we don't think of as music. He has a bass viol that he has in his office, and it's an electric bass, and it's right next to mine. And some of the sounds I hear out of there, I think either there's an electrical short in something, or he's composing. And I say that with very, very tongue-in-cheek. And I'm very much looking forward to having him on. We will hear some of his compositions and also talk about this new festival. And I'm sorry to say, Gary and Kent, we are at time for this show. It has been an absolute pleasure having you here as guests in the studio. I hope you'll consent to come again.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
This was fun.
And just as a reminder out there, this is On the Arts with Michael A. Harding. Our goal is to make sure that there is no artistic opportunity out there, whether it be to participate or to observe as an audience member, that is our best kept little secret. We don't want that to happen. We want you to know that there is stuff down here going on. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you somewhere in the arts.